Hello guys, welcome to Redditor's Revenge. Here we post amazing revenge stories daily. And if you want more content like this, please do subscribe to the channel and stay tuned with us. Moving on to today's first story, about how OP's uncle exacted his vengeance on OP's jealous neighbor, who wrecked OP's brand new BMW, so he got publicly humiliated and later regretted. Now story. It was my birthday. I 20M never really liked my birthday. It just never felt that special to me for some reason. I rarely celebrated with friends and very few people gave me gifts, provided they remembered. Of course, that did not apply to Uncle Suresh. We lived in an upper middle class neighborhood in India. My dad left us when I was young, so my mom had to get a job and provide for us. Of course, some family members, like my Uncle Suresh, helped and we got by. We are not rich by any means, but we are not poor either. Still, we struggled sometimes because of not having a father, and I felt like I missed out on some things. I got into college a couple of years ago, studying computer sciences. I liked it, but I hated the commute. Every day, I would have to take like 3 different means of transportation, including a rickshaw to get there and back, of course. In the hot summer months, this is torture. Anyway, since that day was my birthday, my mom invited Uncle Suresh to have lunch with us. He is not married, so he came alone. He entered, had lunch, wished me happy birthday, and all the usual gestures, but I felt disappointed that he hadn't brought me any gift. I thought maybe he had forgotten until he was about to leave. Just as we were saying hello to Uncle Suresh and opening the door for him, I suddenly saw a brand new BMW parked right outside the apartment building. I thought it was his since my uncle is a very wealthy and very powerful man in India. He opened the door to the car and suddenly gestured for me to come inside. He let me in the driver's seat and then told me that the car was mine. I couldn't believe it to the point where I audibly screamed. This car cost north of 100,000 here in India, so it instantly became the best present I had ever gotten. I thanked Uncle Suresh so warmly, and then we took the car out for a test drive. I knew how to drive, as I drove my friend's old Volvo before, but this was completely different. I was almost embarrassed to drive it in my neighborhood since nobody else drives a BMW. The next day, I drove the car to college and showed it off to all my friends. Everyone was magnetized by the BMW and I instantly became the coolest guy at college. However, one colleague of mine, who also lives in the building next to us in my neighborhood, kept strangely eyeing the car and told me about how its maintenance is tough and expensive and how much I'll have to change eventually. I ignored what he said and I felt like maybe he was just jealous. We were neighbors since we were kids, so I knew that his financial situation wasn't the best. Still, I offered him a ride home, but he refused. As soon as I got back, my mom lectured me about how this car is a privilege and how I will forever be grateful to Uncle Suresh. But I told her that I was. I still wasn't sure what Uncle Suresh did, but I knew that he was a big businessman here, despite not being that old. The next day at university, I kept talking about the car again. It was all the talk and I took my friends out for ice cream in it, except for Sandeep, my neighbor, who refused the ride. I didn't know why Sandeep hated that I had this car so much, since he usually drives a car that his parents left for him. Of course, it's no BMW, but he had a car way before me. While we were going home, I offered Sandeep a ride again, but he refused. At that point, I stopped caring and just went home. As I was pulling into our street, I saw Sandeep arguing with the rickshaw driver before storming off towards his building. I gave him a couple of friendly honks and parked to go upstairs. That night, I promised my mom that I would drive her to the supermarket, but as soon as I left the building, I saw the car destroyed. The windshield and windows were shattered. The hood was heavily dented, 2 tires were punctured, and the right view mirror was broken. My blood was boiling, and I had to find out who did that immediately, even if I already had my doubt and suspect. I wanted to call the police, but my mom told me to call Uncle Suresh instead. However, I was too sad and depressed to call him. I went back inside, ashamed to say that I cried for over an hour. The car wasn't just that. It was also a symbol that perhaps our time with money struggles is over and I had finally moved up in the world. My mom came to my room to try to comfort me, but I wasn't having it. She kept trying to tell me how we will fix it. I told her that I was so happy for one full day before something I loved was taken away from me again, just like always. I could see Mom starting to get emotional, so she grabbed her phone and went outside. I didn't bother to try to listen to what she was saying, but I hoped that it would be for good reason. The next day, in full shame, I had to take the 3 means of transportation again to university. I arrived feeling humiliated, even if I didn't have the car for long. Throughout the day, I could barely focus and called my mom several times to ask about the dealership, insurance, and all the important paperwork. Just as I was about to leave for home, Sandeep came over with his car and offered me a ride home, but he did it in such a smug, condescending way. I told him no, and he went on about how fast and economical his car was and how it's better than taking transportation. But I was too livid. I knew it was him, and that encounter just solidified it. I called him out on it and told him that I knew he was the one who wrecked my car. I told him about how he looked so jealous and that was his motive because he felt bad about his car and himself. Everyone on the sidewalk gathered, and some of them were starting to laugh. Sandeep got more and more agitated and continued to deny it, saying that I was overreacting and just too sad to think straight. A couple of my friends came over to tell me that I should leave, and as I was leaving, Sandeep just gave me a smug wink and drove off quickly. I went home that day and found Uncle Suresh sitting with my mom. She was explaining everything to him, and as soon as I got in, he asked her to excuse us and he sat down with me. He told me that the car will be fixed and that everything will be fine, but that in the meantime, he needs to know who did this. I hesitated to tell him at first because I knew Uncle Suresh means business, but as soon as I remembered Sandeep's smug wink at the end, I told him immediately. Uncle Suresh asked me where he lived and I told him that he lived in the house right next to us. After we had lunch, Uncle Suresh told me to come with him over to Sandeep's house. I wanted to see what would happen, so I immediately said yes. My uncle and I walked over and rang the doorbell, but Sandeep's father opened it. My uncle immediately put on a fake smile and asked where Sandeep was. His father asked him why, and Uncle Suresh told him that he was from the university and wanted to interview Sandeep about something. His father told us that Sandeep was out with friends and closed the door. I asked my uncle about what we would do then, but he just told me to wait and try to get proof that Sandeep really did it. The next day, I went back to university and had a plan. I went over to Sandeep and pretended that I was all sad and that I was sorry for yelling at him. I told him about how I just felt bad and didn't know what to do or who to blame, so the devil got the better of me and I just assumed it was him. I also told him that I was sorry for not accepting the ride and that his car is awesome. The words were like music to Sandeep's ear, considering how much of an insecure narcissist he was. He told me not to mention it and that it was water under the bridge. He also bragged about how someone important from the university visited his house yesterday because he wanted to interview him. I kept acting like I was impressed and just waited for the perfect moment. After a few hours, while we were in a lecture, Sandeep got up to go to the bathroom and I slipped my phone into his bag with the recording application on. Now all I had to do was wait. Since I was certain that Sandeep did it, I had a friend of ours go up to him and joke about how my car was destroyed and how I didn't deserve it. Sandeep, unsurprisingly, went along and told our friend how the car was too cool for me and then confessed that he had done it. To go with the act, our friend laughed and told him how great that was and how I deserved it. Later that day, I went over to Sandeep's house, pretending that I had accidentally left my phone in his bag. He opened up and was confused at first, but then let me in to go look for the phone. I had relied on the fact that my phone's battery would die by the time Sandeep got home, and I was right. As soon as we opened his bag, we found my phone and it was dead. I told Sandeep that I was sorry and I left. Back home, my mom was waiting for me and asked me what I was going to do. I told her that Uncle Suresh and I are planning to prove that Sandeep did it, but she was worried. She told me how revenge can make a person blind, but I was adamant about getting it. She told me that I should let Uncle Suresh handle it and not get involved, but I told her that Uncle Suresh and I were getting closer over this, and that it was the first time I felt that way since I last met my dad before he passed away. In some way, my mom was glad that I was bonding with my uncle. After I got back to my room, I sent the recording over to Uncle Suresh, and he told me that we had exactly what we needed to bring Sandeep down. I asked him if he was going to call the police and he told me no. I didn't understand what he was going to do, but I was excited at the possibility. My mom never really told me how Uncle Suresh has such connections, But I always imagined that he just got very rich from his companies and that was why he was always in control. My uncle told me that he would be coming over tomorrow and that I should bring my best camera. The following day, Uncle Suresh came over very early, before I even left for school, and he had 2 police officers with him. I asked him how he got the police and he told me that they were his friends. I didn't know his connections ran this deep, but he told me to follow them and we walked over to Sandeep's house. He signaled to the police officers to wait in his car, and he and I knocked on the door. Sandeep's dad opened the door again and Uncle Suresh just entered the house as if it was his own. Sandeep's dad kept yelling and telling us to get out, but I called for Sandeep loudly to come out of his room. Sandeep came out and saw both of us and I could see the sudden worry in his eye. Uncle Suresh was not physically intimidating, but he had this vibe about him that you do not want to mess with him. Sandeep approached us and asked us what was wrong. I didn't talk to him but played the recording of him confessing to wrecking my car to his parents. Uncle Suresh was smiling as Sandeep's parents started freaking out and yelling. They couldn't believe what he had done, and just as Sandeep's dad was about to slap him, Uncle Suresh told him let me do the honors and he smacked Sandeep right across the face. I instantly let out a shocked chuckle as Sandeep fell right to the floor. It felt very good. Uncle Suresh got on, put his knee on Sandeep's stomach, and kept slapping him on the floor. I was getting so excited that I started recording the whole thing and got closer, asking Sandeep how he was feeling and telling him how stupid and ugly his car was. Sandeep's parents were frozen at first from shock and anger, but they started panicking and trying to get my uncle off of their son. My uncle looked Sandeep's dad dead in the eye and threatened to knock him out if he ever touched him again. Sandeep's dad was old, overweight, and had a heart condition, so he just backed off and let his son take the beating while begging my uncle to let him go. Sandeep's mom was also crying loudly and begging. After a few minutes, Uncle Suresh let Sandeep go. Sandeep's face was red and tears were running down his eyes. My uncle turned around to come toward me and told me that everything is taken care of. He shouted at Sandeep that he would fix the whole thing and publicly apologized, and Sandeep kept quiet until my uncle was about to exit. And he talked back to him and threatened that he would do it again and call the cops on us. As soon as he heard that, my uncle turned around, asked him, "You mean these cops?" and signaled his 2 cop friends to come in. The look on Sandeep's face was priceless as the 2 policemen came inside the house and dragged Sandeep out. As they were putting him in the squad car, my uncle told them to take care of him well until he is man enough to apologize and fix what he had done. The squad car drove off and I couldn't be happier. Still, I was curious, so I asked Uncle Suresh how he knew these 2 police officers and how we wouldn't get in trouble for this. He explained the whole thing to me. A few years back, my uncle was wrongfully imprisoned, but he made his connections inside, and once he was out, he had enough powerful and rich friends to partner with him on his business. Being so rich, he started doing some deals with the police to help them out and get them out of tight spots. Over time, he had so many friends on the police force that he was untouchable. I was impressed and asked him when Sandeep would be released, and he told me to just wait a couple of days and he'd be back singing and begging for my forgiveness. A couple of days later, I was just about to leave for university when I saw Sandeep coming over from across the street. He looked humiliated. His face was bruised, he had a black eye, his clothes were torn, and he didn't have his shoes. He got so beat up in those 2 days that he spent locked up. He started calling the entire neighborhood, including many of our colleagues at college, out loud, and people looked from their windows and stood on their balconies. Sandeep looked down in shame and started apologizing to me. He explained to everyone that he was the one who vandalized my car and that he was publicly apologizing. He also told me that he would cover the costs of the entire thing. It felt good, but it wasn't enough. I asked him where he got his car and he told me that it's actually his mom's car and she just lets him drive it to college but takes the keys back as soon as he is back. And everyone laughed. I knew some embarrassing secrets about Sandeep, so I kept asking him stuff that everyone laughed at as soon as he answered. Like how he cried watching romantic movies and how he wet his bed until he was 13. Once we were done, he shamefully entered his house and I picked up the phone. It was Uncle Suresh. He asked me if everything was good and I thanked him. I told him that Sandeep would cover the expenses of the car, and he told me that it should only take a few days and that in the meantime, he got me a driver to take me to university until the car is finished. I couldn't believe how generous he was, and even though I knew it would upset my mom, revenge still felt good. In my opinion, the neighbor was responsible for his own action, because the neighbor, in my perspective, was way more jealous. And he hurt his own ego despite OP's several generous offer to give him a ride home. He deserves to get humiliated because he wasn't guilty for his action, not even 1%. Now here is the end of today's video. I hope you're enjoying my content. Guys, let me know what's your opinion about OP's uncle, and does the neighbor deserve beating or not in the comments section. So before leaving, please hit the like button and do subscribe to the channel to stay tuned with us for more awesome stories.